Today we're gonna skin and flesh a beaver tail in preparation for tea tanning. This is a tail that's obviously been removed from a beaver. A lot of times on bigger beaver tails like this, we'll cut them off and freeze them and save them for later in the year to deal with. We're gonna go through how I like to skin them and flesh them in preparation. It's a lot like doing a fish, just a really difficult fish. We'll go through and get this one prepped, and Rebecca's gonna tea tan it later. First thing I always do is do a cut down both sides. I'm using two different knives today. I'm gonna use my fillet knife a little later. These are just some cutlery knives we bought from a cutlery store for very cheap. They're what I like to use for skinning. They hold an edge real well. They're small. There's some risk with the super pointed tip when you're skinning some things, but I like doing them on beaver tail this way. So I do a cut down the sides and then lever out. That's our starting cut. I'll do one of those on both sides. So you're just inserting inside of the flesh, then levering out through the leather. We need to work this flap back around the gristle to give ourselves something to work with. This is working down to where we'll be able to get the chain gambrel and a vice grips on it, so we can get this ripped off of here a little bit easier, so we don't have to fillet the whole thing out. What I'm doing here is just following the tailbone around, working that gristle back. We want to get kind of a flap started on both sides so we can get the chain gambrel around the tailbone itself to pull on. Once you get this flap cut all the way around, you're going to insert your knife back in the cut you already started here. We're just going to do a cut all the way down the edge. The leather is pretty resilient, so your knife is going to want to stay under it pretty well on its own. You don't want to go all the way to the tip because you'll end up cutting out. Once we get it peeled down, we'll peel that out the rest of the way. You can actually watch, if you look closely enough, the tip of my blade under the leather right there. And nice thing about beaver tail leathers, it's thick enough, the knife won't pop through on its own most of the time. So once I get that cut kind of worked around both sides, give ourselves just a little more breathing room here. So you kind of want to give yourself a little knuckle to work with right here. I'll cut just a little bit of this in just so the chain gambrel isn't going through so much junk. So we get a nice little knuckle right there to hold on to. That's what we're going to attach our chain gambrel to. So this is a lot like doing tail on anything else, really. You've done if you picture this like a coyote tail or anything else, we've done our starting cut around the base, but instead of going down the center of the tail like you would on a regular fur bear, you've worked down the sides. Your chain gambrel is kind of functioning similar to your tail skinner, what your tail puller would, but instead this is going to hold it steady, and then we're going to grab here and pull down. So I use vice grips. Grab yourself a flap of beaver, clamp it down, and it'll peel right off, just like that. So you can see there's not a whole lot of gristle left on there. See, it's full tail. It's pretty even on both sides. Remember, our cut ended about here on both sides when I was coming down, so just like doing any other fur bear, you're not going all the way to the tip. You'll end a normal fur bear, you'd use your tail splitter to finish that. On these, we went as far as you can see where the knife stopped cutting. There's my saw marks from my knife. The rest of this peels right off on its own. We're going to grab the other side, and we'll pull this off the rest of the tailbone on this side. This side obviously has a lot more gristle on it because we just pulled the other side off. The gristle has to go somewhere. This is what we're going to end up using the fillet knife to get a lot of this off before we start fleshing. So now we have our skin off our tail. We're done with this. That'll end up going out into our pile for the critters. we're going to use our fillet knife just like you're taking the flesh off of a fish fillet. We're going to get as much of this gristle off with the knife as we can. It'll make our lives a lot easier when we go back and start fleshing it afterwards. Start with this one. Just like you're filleting a fish, you're putting a lot of downward pressure on that fillet knife, getting a lot of that gristle out of the way right away. This is really thick fat. It's kind of like the gristle around the base of the tail on steroids. So trying to just take it off with a fleshing knife or a fleshing beam is not a great experience. This is what I've found is a good way to kind of cut corners and get that process going a lot faster, especially dealing with this up here. If you look closely in here, you can actually see all the tendony gristle that's at the base of the tail, and that's the stuff that'll really fight your fleshing knife. So the more of this we can get off, it'll make your life a lot easier when you go back to flesh. Getting the fat off is good, but it's getting a lot of this off is where you really gain some time. Tails taper from really super paper thin on the tip end. You can see how thin that is there, to much thicker on the body end. So there will be quite a bit of difference with even when you're done fleshing between what the end of the tail looks like and the body end of the tail looks like. So you don't have to get crazy trying to get this stuff off. It's a lot like doing a beaver normally. You're getting as much as you can, and then we'll go back and clean it up. So that's about all I'll take off with the knife on this one. We'll go back with the fleshing knife and clean both these, or with fleshing tool and clean both these up when we're done getting this off. We'll go to this one. This is that first one we took off. You can see how much less gristle there is because this one peeled away from the bone first. So we won't have to take nearly as much off this before we go back with the fleshing tool to clean it. Same thing, you can see this gristly chunk right here. We want to get rid of a lot of that. There we go, we've got both of them worked down about as far as we need to with the fillet knife. Now we're going to get our fleshing tool and scrape off as much as we can. You can use anything for this, whatever works for you. I like to use one of these draw styles. I also have a round hog scraper style. This is what I typically use for muskrats. We're going to use the draw style today. So this is a situation where if you were doing a whole ton of these, you might want to set up a vise or a vice grip where you could hold this tip in place some way where you can hold this steady. I grip it with my left hand and then just work it with my right. As you can see, the fat comes off pretty easily. This is that loose white fat on the tail that we were talking about earlier. You don't need to get crazy getting this off. The more you can get, the better, but eventually you will start risking ripping the tip of the tip of the leather down here. So you want to get as much of this as you can before you switch sides. You can see right there that little tip ripped off a little bit, so that's where you don't want to get too crazy working the edge down, or that'll really start to rip on the end there. Then we'll spin it around, we'll hold this side, get as much of this as we can. You can actually hear that tendony gristle I talked about earlier, and then this one actually has an old scar. That's what that weird noise is. It's got a scar on its tail. So it's just like anything else, you don't want to work that too hard or you'll end up ripping it. That's about it. It's a lot like doing a muskrat. You don't want to get too crazy with it or you'll end up destroying it. That one's ready to go. This is back to the one. This one had much heavier fat. This is that first tail we filleted down, so it's going to take a little bit more to get all this down to that skin layer. So you can see, just like anything else, we've got all that loose gristle off, all that loose fat off. This is where, again, you want to come back and get as much of this grease as you can, but you don't want to go too hard around these edges or you end up ripping it, especially with these older, bigger beavers. They tend to have nicks and scars and things that'll really rip out easily, so don't get too carried away down on the tip end like this. But you can see how much, even though I've got all the loose stuff off, you can see how much grease we're kind of pressing out on each one of these swipes. We're getting quite a bit of material out of there, so it's worth going back and hitting it a couple more times. And there we go. At this point, this is about as far as I'd flush either of these down. They are ready to go. At this point, you could put these in the fridge to get ready for tea tanning, which is what Becca's going to do. You could salt these and dry these to be sent off to a tanner. These are as far as you're going to take them here. I've never trap or dried these, just let them air dry. We always salt them down with borax if we're going to send them out. But she's going to do these fresh in a tea tanning, so these are ready to go. It's not too difficult. Once you've done a couple, you can get through them easy. You just got to have the right tools and try it a couple times. They're not too bad. Anybody can do it.